Greetings YouTube! Welcome to part 3 of making the Metamorphosis Dress, a series in which I make a transformation dress which changes from a caterpillar into a butterfly. In this episode I'm going to concentrate on the inner dress and make something that vaguely resembles this butterfly. So let's get started! I had some of this polka dot fabric, which would replicate the body of the monarch butterfly. I did have enough of this to make the bodice. I did also want to use it to trim the wing skirt, so I bought myself another metre just to make sure I had enough. I've cut out all the pieces for my butterfly bodice. I've also cut out interfacing pieces for the lower front half and the 3 back pieces. I sewed my 3 back panels and 3 lower front panels together. I then folded the seams under and pressed them, and top stitched them. I've also marked out the darts on the top front bodice. I've pinned the upper part of my bodice to the lower part, and I've brought all the excess fabric into the centre where I've made 6 small pleats. So I sew these 2 halves together, and then sew the 2 sides together at the right side. I've just tried on my bodice off camera and it doesn't fit. Somehow it's become 1 centimetre too big on either side. Don't know how this has happened. The mock-up I did fit just fine, and I'm using the same weight cotton. I used the same pattern, and I haven't lost any inches since I last tried it on. I didn't want to unpick this and take it in, or start again. And the bottom needed to stay the same size to fit the skirt. And the waist size actually fits, so I only need to take it in at the top. So I've put in 2 diagonal darts from under the armpit towards the centre front of the bodice. I've tried this on with the darts pinned, and it fits, so I'm going to mark out the darts on the wrong side of the fabric and stitch. I'll be using this lightweight orange cotton, which I used for the lining of the caterpillar dress. The shape of the butterfly wings are more or less a semicircle, so I'm going to draft a half-circle skirt. I draft the skirt onto my orange lining fabric. I draw a line down the middle because I'm going to split the skirt into 4. And I want this skirt to be longer at the back, so I measure the front of the skirt to be about knee length. And I add 2 inches to the back and graduate the length of the hem. And with the exception of the centre back, I round off the corner pieces to make them look more wing-like. I then cut out my pieces, 2 front and 2 back. I then transfer this onto paper, and I'm going to save these pieces for later. I've overlocked my orange underskirt in black to make it look a bit decorative. And I sew the front and back panels together on the right side. The left side of the skirt I leave open for now. I'll close that up when I've put the dress together and inserted the zip. I press the seam open, and on the open left side, I press the side seam under. For the wing skirt, I have a load of voile left over from a previous project. I also have this black fabric. I take the paper wing patterns that I set aside earlier. I sketch out the pattern of the butterfly. And when I'm happy, I go over the lines with pen. After some deliberation, I decided that I didn't like the original design I made. Though I tried to follow the pattern of the butterfly, I thought it didn't look so good on paper. And this section here I'm going to cut out onto black fabric. And when it comes to sewing the pieces together, this will be much simpler to sew together than this. And this is art, so I'm going for an approximation of a butterfly, not an exact replica. I'm going to cut off the bottom part of each wing, and I'm going to piece on a frill in my polka dot fabric. So I cut away the bottom part, leaving 1 centimetre for seam allowance. I then cut away my black section, again leaving 1 centimetre for seam allowance. I take my cut out piece and place it on my black fabric. I extended it on 2 centimetres on either side to allow for the 1 centimetre that was originally cut away and another centimetre for the new seam allowance. I've taken my black pieces and I've marked 1 centimetre in from each edge. I have these pieces of lace. It was a long strip of rose lace, which I've cut down into rounded pieces. And I'll place these with the edge along the stitch line. I pin these in place and then sew around the edges. I've taken my voile fabric and I've folded it into 4. I've pinned my paper pattern pieces onto it and I cut them out with pinking shears. Now I have all my pieces cut out and I split them into 2 pieces each so that each piece will have 2 layers of voile. And because this fabric is a nightmare to work with, I basted the 2 layers together. So now my 2 layers are acting as one. I started doing some tests for the skirt, thinking about ways to make the veins inside the wings. I tried a regular zigzag stitch, which I didn't like much, and cording with a piece of black cord between the 2 pieces of fabric. Then I tried surface cording with the cord on top of the 2 layers of fabric. I found that with the surface cording, the zigzag stitch has distorted the fabric a little bit. On the smaller pieces it's not too much of an issue, it's just the odd millimetre. But on the bigger pieces it will make more of a difference, so I'm going to try something else. I've done a couple of tests attaching ribbon using a straight stitch, and that's caused no problems, so I'm going to use that method. I then take lengths of black ribbon and I pin them to my fabric, following the pattern. And I stitch these down. I then take the 3 pieces of my back wing and I stitch them together, holding wrong sides together. I then overlock the seams, press them downwards. I top stitch the seams down, adding some black lace to the bottom edge. I've made some strips of bias tape, which I use to encase the edges of the wings. I attach my bias strips to the edges of the wings and sew in some of my black lace. I've used my polka dot fabric to make some ruffles for the end of the wings. I've cut out strips of fabric 40 inches long by 2.5 inches wide. For the front pieces, I've tapered it at each end. For my back pieces, I've tapered it at one end and left the other end square. I overlock the bottom edge and gather it at the top. Now I take my frills and I pin them to the bottom edges of each wing with the wrong sides together. I have some white lace that I'm going to use for trim around the bottom. I pin my white lace to the tip of the black section on the wing and I stitch them together. As I'm stitching, I want to make sure I grab the very edge of the lace. I overlock the edges and press them downwards, and now I can unpick all my basting stitches. Now I have all my components made, I pin them all together and try them on. It's starting to look good. I then try the skirts on underneath the caterpillar bodice to make sure it all fits and holds it in place. And it does. And as for the transformation, will it work? You have to wait until part 4 to find out. If you don't want to miss that, don't forget to subscribe, like this video. You can also follow me on social media @SandyCreature. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!